simply by hearing from an authoritative source with the ear and heart, one can release the pastimes of the Lord. Otherwise, it is not possible. Sanatana Goswami therefore has especially warned that one should not hear anything about the personality of Godhead from the lips of a non-devotee. Non-devotees are considered to be like serpents, as milk is poisoned by a serpent's touch. So although the narration of the pastimes of the Lord is as pure as milk, when administered by a serpent-like non-devotees, it becomes poisonous. Not only does it have no effect in the transcendental pleasure, but it is dangerous also. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has warned that no description of the pastimes of the Lord should be heard from the Mayavada or impersonalist school. He has clearly said Mayavada Bhashya Sunile Haya Sarva Nasha. If anyone hears the Mayavadi's interpretation of the pastimes of the Lord or their interpretation of Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, or any other Vedic literature, then he is doomed. Once one is associated with impersonalists, he can never understand the personal feature of the Lord and his transcendental pastimes. Sudha Goswami was speaking to the sages headed by Saunaka, and therefore he addressed them in this verse as Dvija, twice born. The sages assembled in Naimisharanya hearing Srimad Bhagavatam from Sudha Goswami were all Brahmanas, but to acquire the qualification of a Brahmana is not everything. Merely to be twice born is not perfection. Perfection is attained when one hears the pastimes and activities of the Lord from a bona fide source. Om Kyantimiranta Jnananjan Shalakaya Chakshar Militam Mena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Ena Bhutale Swayam Rupakadamahyam Tadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Udapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Shri Rupam Sankarjatam Sargana Gunatantam Tam Jivam Sadvaitam Sabdhutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sargana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitam Scha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpade Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Stude Bhaktakan Chana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavneshwari Vrishabhanuste Devi Pranamami Haripriye Vancha Kalpatarubhyasya Kapasnudubhe Vacha Padtanam Pavnebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Vishnupada Krishna Pasta Bhutalesh Mati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Namne Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauruvani Pacharne Nirvisheshashnya Madi Paschatya Desatarne Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Shri Paramatma Shri Chaitanya Hare Krishna. So we see here Srila Sudha Goswami telling Vidura, my dear
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Yes,
sorry
Mataji.
to disturb you. Prabhuji, yesterday's shloka also was not done because there was no class yesterday, just the 32.
32 or 33?
Today is 33, right?
Today is 33. Yesterday was 32. Okay.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, if you want to, like.
Okay, I can cover this, but I need to read the translation and purport. If you don't mind, I'll read it. I'll read the shloka once. Text 32. Maya yata nuktam avadihte harehe kutaavatarasya sumitra chestitham yata hiranyaksha udara vikramo mahamrde Krida Navan Nirakritah. Translation. Maitreya continued, my dear Vidura, I have explained to you the personality of Godheads coming down as the first born incarnation and killing in a great fight a demon of unprecedented prowess, as if he were just a plaything. This has been narrated by me as I heard it from my predecessor, spiritual master. Here the sage Maitreya admits that he explained the incident of the killing of Hiranyaksha by the Supreme Personality of Godhead as a straight narration. He did not manufacture anything or add interpretation, but explained whatever he had heard from his spiritual master. Thus, he accepted as bona fide the system of parampara, or receiving the transmitted message in disciplic succession. Unless received by this bona fide process of hearing from a spiritual master, the statement of an acharya or preceptor cannot be valid. It is also stated here that although the demon Hiranyaksha was unlimited in prowess, he has just He was just like a doll for the Lord. A child breaks so many dolls without real endeavor. Similarly, although a demon may be very powerful and extraordinary in the eyes of an ordinary man, in the material world to the Lord, killing such a demon is no difficulty. He can kill millions of demons as simply as a child plays with dolls and breaks them. Thank you for informing me, Mataji. I'll cover both the verses. So in the first verse, text 32, Maitreya is telling Vidura that I have explained to you the pastime of the personality of Godhead as the firstborn incarnation. And in that great fight, the demon Hiranyaksha was killed just by the Lord, just like a plaything. So, though the demons may exhibit themselves to be very, very powerful, but in front of the Lord, they are all very insignificant. So, what to talk about one demon? The Lord can kill hundreds and thousands of, even millions of demons at one point of time without any difficulty. So, example is given is just like the Lord plays with dolls and breaks them. So, a child can break a small doll if you give a doll made of anything. The child can just play with it and break. So, similarly, the Lord, for the Lord, killing these demons is like a plaything. So, but the other part of the message is more or less in continuation with what we have read in 33. That is the importance of hearing from the bona fide devotee. This is what we are going to discuss today. So Sudha Goswami is telling Vidura that I have heard this narration from authoritative source, that is Maitreya, and he was very, very pleased. So the point is that one should hear transcendental knowledge from an authoritative source. When we say authoritative, even in a material platform, one must always have a guru from a bona fide source, or else the knowledge that one receives may be imperfect. It may not be it may not resolve the purpose for which one is hearing, which is particularly when we hear Krishna Katha, one should derive some pleasure by hearing. If that is not derived, that means that one is not hearing from a proper authority. There are many examples given in Srimad Bhagavatam. One example is that Saunaka Rishi, to whom Sudha Goswami was addressing, he congratulated Sudha Goswami as he's the most fortunate and respected of all who can speak Srimad Bhagavatam. So in that verse, he says, Sudha Sudha Mahabaho. He's addressing Sudha Goswami twice. That indicates that amount of eagerness and the enthusiasm that he's having to hear from Srila Sudha Goswami. This is the primary qualification for one to hear a transcendent sound vibration, an intensive eagerness. Yes, I want to hear Krishna Katha and I want to remember Krishna Katha. If that is not there, the one who is hearing, he may not have that desire even if he's hearing from an authoritative source. So Sukadeva Goswami mentions in Srimad Bhagavatam first canto that he studied this great Srimad Bhagavatam from his father and his spiritual master Vyasadeva. That means Vyasadeva was not only his father, but also his spiritual master. So he explained that this is the process of hearing. He heard from his father, Srila Vyasadeva, who compiled it under the instruction of his spiritual Narad Muni. That means Narad Muni instructed Srila Vyasadeva to compile Srimad Bhagavatam, which Vyasadeva compiled, and he recited it to his son Sukadeva Goswami. Now, Sukadeva Goswami was narrating to the Sudha Goswami, which Sudha Goswami has heard. Now, another very nice example is Lord Brahma. Now, Brahma, he got initiated by the Lord, and then he heard Srimad Bhagavatam. And the process doesn't end with just the initiation. When Brahma got the initiation, he got the mantra from Krishna, and then he became a devotee. Then he performed tapasya, which gave him the determination that what he had to do. Then he meditated on the knowledge that he received, and then he started the creation. So that is the process. So first we must hear from a proper source. After taking the initiation, Brahma performed tapasya. It is not just we got initiated and immediately he got everything. No, he performed tapasya, which gave him that determination. Yes, I must do this. creation. That is my role. Then he meditated on the knowledge which he received from the Lord, and then he started the creation. So it is not just the creation took place as it is. So this example is given that one who is thus initiated in the disciplic succession can have the same result as Brahma got in his power of creation. So from this, Brahma knew the perfect description of a creation. He did not argue with the Lord, why this, why that, why this sloka, why that knowledge. He did not put forward, but he was submissive. So like I gave the first example, one must be eager. Not only eagerness, one must be submissive to the authority. And then with the knowledge that one receives, one has to cultivate what is called devotional service and use his intelligence. So Brahma did all these very, very perfectly, and that is how the whole creation was made. So similarly, one should hear Srimad Bhagavatam from a bona fide spiritual master or his representative. Vidura was a great devotee of the Lord, and he had personal association of the Lord. But still, he heard the transcendental message from a great sage like Maitreya. And when he heard Srimad Bhagavatam, tears were flowing from his eyes, and he fell down at the feet of his spiritual master and fixed his mind on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Now, Maitreya Rishi was also not an ordinary person. He was a very great personality. And even before he heard the Uddhava Gita from Krishna. So then Vidura heard from Uddhava and from Maitreya. Now, Vidura advised Dhritarashtra many, many times that he was not in the following the principles of Dharma. In fact, there are occasions when Vidura got very heavy on Dhritarashtra, but still he could not hear because he had closed his ears. And finally, he agreed that he was attached to his son. And as you all know, the outcome, the entire clan got destroyed. Now, another successful process that is given of hearing is Prahlad Maharaj. Prahlad Maharaj heard from Narad Muni, who was a spiritual master, even when he was in the womb of his mother. Now, these are things that we may not be able to comprehend or how it can happen. But yes, that is the power of the transcendental knowledge. And that is also the power of hearing from a very authoritative source. Now, one example that is given is about Dhruva Maharaj in Srimad Bhagavatam. Lord was physically present in front of Dhruva Maharaj. But still, Dhruva Maharaj is emphasizing on the importance of hearing the glories of the Lord from pure devotees. So that is the effect of hearing from highly self-realized souls. And one of the verses, Dhruva Maharaj is glorifying the Lord. He says that the bliss derived from meditating on the Lord's lotus feet or hearing about the glories of the Lord from pure devotees is unlimited and from far beyond Brahmananda, and what to speak of the temporary happiness derived in the heavenly planets. So even though the Lord is present before Dhruva Maharaj, he is emphasizing on the importance of hearing the glories of the Lord from pure devotees. That is the effect of hearing from highly self-realized souls. So what is this Lord here Dhruva Maharaj emphasize? He says that the bliss, that means by hearing Krishna Katha, one must receive or one must attain some happiness. Not the happiness, it is bliss. The bliss is supposed to be at a higher level than even the happiness that we normally derive. So that bliss that is derived from meditating on the Lord's feet or hearing about the glories of the Lord is unlimited. Whereas happiness is limited to a certain extent, but bliss is unlimited. And what he says, what to speak of that temporary happiness derived in the heavenly planets. So what to speak of the happiness in this earthly planet, the bliss that one derives by hearing Srimad Bhagavatam surpasses even the happiness, temporary happiness that is attained by being in that is one can get in the heavenly planets. So that is the power of hearing from the authoritative source about Krishna Katha. So now both here, Vidura was a great devotee of the Lord and Maitreya was also a great devotee of the Lord. And Maitreya Rishi was also getting a lot of bliss by narrating the Srimad Bhagavatam to Vidura, and Vidura was also enjoying that in a transcendental mode. So this is the power of Krishna Katha. And one of the verses, Vidura addresses Maitreya. He says, my mind is very inquisitive, and therefore I'm not satisfied with the hearings of the narrations of the Lord. Please speak more and more. So this is the eagerness that Vidura expressed to Maitreya. He says, my mind is very, very inquisitive. So to whatever extent I'm hearing, I'm still not satisfied. I want to hear more and more and more. This was the eagerness that Vidura addressed to Maitreya. And in return, the Maitreya Rishi appreciates Vidura. He says, the inquiry made by you is just befitting a devotee because it contains the activities of the incarnations of personality of Godhead. That means when the person who is hearing is inquisitive, then that transaction becomes more perfect. So there are many important points that one should make note of when hearing these translating messages. And the first and foremost important point that's mentioned is that the speaker should be in the right disciplic succession, in the sense that in the Shastras it is given there are 4 sampradayas: Ruddha Sampradaya, Sri Sampradaya, Gaudiya Sampradaya, and Kumar Sampradaya. So one should hear ideally from one of these sources of an authority from one of these sampradayas. That is what is meant by speaker should be in the right disciplic succession. And the next is that person should be practicing what one is preaching, that is walking the talk, and living as per Srimad Bhagavatam. I mean, the person who preaches, if he is not practicing what he is preaching, he will not be able to give that effect of giving the talk. And then another important point mentioned is that obeying the instructions given by acharyas and spiritual master, and be situated in proper consciousness. In the sense that we have to obey whatever the instructions are given by the spiritual master or the great acharyas. When we do that, then we become situated in our proper consciousness. Because our consciousness comes out in the course of the expressions and is carried forward to the hearers. So if the preacher leads a pure life or a simple, and Srila Prabhupada always emphasized on purity is the force. So if the speaker preaches with purity, then that purity is carried forward to those who are hearing. Then that hearing Srimad Bhagavatam has got that effect on the person who is hearing. There are some nice quotes in Srimad Bhagavatam 11th canto. Now, this is a conversation between Lord Krishna and Uddhava. Uddhava is also a great devotee of the Lord. So Lord Krishna is giving a lot of instructions to Uddhava, and these are some few instructions which I picked up in the 11th canto, 10th chapter. It's from sloka 5 onwards. The first sloka, which is sloka 5, the translation says, Krishna is telling, one who has accepted me as the supreme goal of life should strictly observe the scriptural injunctions forbidding sinful activities, and as far as possible should execute the injunctions prescribing minor regulative duties such as cleanliness. Ultimately, however, one should approach a bona fide spiritual master who is full in knowledge of me as I am, who is peaceful, and who by spiritual elevation is not different from me. Let us understand these important points in these slokas. They are very, very important for us to know. He says, one who has accepted me as the supreme goal of life. If one has accepted, yes, Krishna is the supreme, that one must attain Krishna before the end of this life, he should strictly observe the scriptural injunctions forbidding sinful activities. In our Sampradaya, we emphasize on the process of chanting and following the 4 regulative principles, chanting 16 rounds and following these regulative principles. So, different Sampradayas may have different, but the thing is, we believe in what we have been instructed upon. That is, chanting minimum 16 rounds and following the 4 regulative principles. And then executing the injunctions prescribed, minor things such as cleanliness, etc. Of course, cleanliness is a part of godliness. Unless until you are clean, you cannot become godly. And ultimately, he says, ultimately, one should approach a bona fide spiritual master who is full in knowledge of me as I am. That means a bona fide spiritual master is one who is in full knowledge of the Lord as much as the Lord is. So the spiritual master has got the same knowledge as much as the Supreme Lord has got, and who is peaceful, and who by spiritual elevation is not different from me. So that means here Krishna is declaring that the spiritual master is none other, is no different from Krishna himself. And he is full of knowledge and he is always peaceful. So this is one of the qualities that Krishna explains to Uddhava. In the next sloka, sloka 6, Krishna says, the servant or disciple of the spiritual master should be free from false prestige, never consider himself to be the doer. So the disciple of a proper spiritual master, he can be also perfect if he is free from false prestige. If the disciple thinks that I have got this power, it is because of me, I'm doing this, I'm capable of doing this, or because of me, I'm my power to speak, I'm speaking. If one has got this false prestige, then one will never be able to speak Srimad Bhagavatam in the proper perspective, and one who hears from such a person will not have any effect. So never considering himself to be the doer. A perfect disciple is one who never thinks I am the cause of everything. He always knows that if he speaks, it is Krishna who speaks through his spiritual master. If he hears, it is by Krishna's mercy that he is able to hear by the mercy of his spiritual master. If he is able to preach, he is preaching by the mercy of his spiritual master. If somebody is cooking, it is cooking by the mercy of his spiritual master. So this is how devotional service works. So as I mentioned the example in the beginning of the class, how Lord Brahma meditated on what Lord Krishna instructed. Then the next quality that is given is he should feel enmity towards no one. He should not think that the so-and-so person is an enemy. We cannot consider anyone as an enemy because everyone is a part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. Then he should be active and never lazy. Laziness is one of the biggest impediments in devotional service. And he should give up all sense of proprietorship over the objects of senses, including his wife, children, home, and society. Now, we should not have any misconception or misunderstanding in this. The explanation, it is detailed given that, yeah, we all have relations, wife, children, etc., but they are all temporary for this particular life only. In the next life, we don't know who will be whose wife, who will be whose husband, if we have gone back to Godhead, we may not have any material relationships anymore. So we cannot consider, yes, this is my wife, this is my children, but rather we should always be thinking that this, my wife or my husband or my children, has been given to me by Krishna during this lifetime to achieve perfection of life. And what is that perfection of life? That is to achieve Krishna as the goal of life. Then it mentions he should be endowed with feelings of loving friendship toward the spiritual master and should never become deviated or bewildered. So if one has got good loving relationship with his spiritual master, that is a necessity. The servant or disciple should always desire advancement in spiritual understanding, should not envy anyone, and should always avoid useless conversations. That means one should not engage in unwanted conversations with anybody, but always be discussing Krishna Katha. This is what was the qualification that Vidura and Maitreya had, and Vyasadeva had with Sukadeva Goswami, Sukadeva Goswami had with Sutta Goswami. They were never discussing anything that is not related to Krishna Katha. So one should always be discussing only Krishna Katha. And disciples of Srila Prabhupada further explain that no one can claim to be the permanent proprietor of his so-called wife, family, home, society, and so on. That means nobody can claim that I am the proprietor of my wife, my family, my home, my society. If one tornado or one earthquake comes, our home can be devastated in no point of time. So we must understand that whatever we are, whatever we have, everything is by the mercy of the Supreme Lord. And he says that such material relationships appear and disappear like bubbles on the surface of the ocean. So you see, in an ocean, we might find a bubble, but it just comes and it goes off in no time. So all material relationships are just like that. They can appear and disappear in no time. And then I've skipped a few slokas and come to the sloka number 12, where it says the spiritual master can be compared to the kindling stick, the disciple to the upper kindling stick, and the instruction given by the guru to the third stick placed in between. That means the transcendental knowledge communicated from guru and disciple is compared to a fire arising from the contact of these, which burns the darkness of ignorance, bringing happiness, great happiness both to guru and disciple. That means when we have two sticks and if we light a fire between the two, immediately the fire takes place. So a transcendental knowledge that is communicated from a guru to a disciple is compared to a fire that is coming out of the fire of these, that is, it's like a fire coming out of the contact of these two, which burns the darkness of ignorance to ashes. So before we start the class, we recite Om Jnana Timirandasya. So actually, the meaning is that we are all in the darkness of ignorance, and that darkness of ignorance can be burnt to ashes when we hear from a bona fide authority. And what happens, the result of that is it brings great happiness both to the guru and the disciple. And in the purport, it is mentioned that just as friction between two sticks of firewood produces fire, similarly, bona fide contact between the spiritual master, who is the representative of Krishna, and a sincere disciple produces the fire of knowledge. So this is very much relevant to what I mentioned about Lord Brahma. When one hears from a bona fide authority, then what happens is that it produces a fire of knowledge. And when the disciple takes shelter of the lotus feet of the spiritual master, he automatically acquires perfect knowledge of his original spiritual form. So when we hear these, and then what happens is that we have to apply the teachings also. It is not that we just hear, but we must apply what we hear. And then what happens is that we can realize our original spiritual form. And in the following sloka 13, which is also very important, it's mentioned, by submissively hearing from an expert spiritual master, the expert disciple develops pure knowledge, which repels the onslaught of material illusion arising from the three modes of material knowledge, material nature. So the point is that we are all associated with the three modes of material nature, that is goodness, passion, and ignorance. And when we hear from a perfect authority, then that illusion that comes out of our association with these three modes of material nature is cleared, is cleaned. And what happens is that the outcome, this pure knowledge itself also later ceases, just as fire ceases when the stock of fuel has been consumed. That means initially we need knowledge, but what happens is that when one becomes transcendently situated, then that knowledge also becomes one with the person because he has realized. And why it is given, the reason is given. The disciple does not receive the teachings intellectually, but through submissive inquiries and service attitude. That is, a disciple who hears, what happens is that he does not receive the teachings intellectual, in the sense that we don't receive our knowledge, spiritual knowledge, by our intelligence, but rather through submissive inquiries and service attitude. So submissive inquiry means what? We must have a submit to the proper authority and inquire and clear our doubts that are there in the mind. And then proper attitude. What is that proper attitude? There is no ego between the speaker and hearer, ensuring a free flow of between both. That means the speaker also does not think I'm speaking out of my intelligence, of my smartness. And the person who is hearing also does not think that I am very great and that is why I'm able to hear. No, they are all too insignificant. And when there is no ego between the speaker and hearer, then there is a free flow of knowledge between both. And then the next point that is given is that respecting the speaker as a representative of Vyasadeva. Not think I need to hear, then think I know better than him. Many times when we hear, we may think, oh, I know this, I know that. I know much better than the person from whom I'm hearing. This is what is called the ego. But everyone should respect the speaker as a representative of Vyasadeva. Similarly, the speaker also should consider himself as a representative of Vyasadeva and then speak. And then he says, one cannot release Srimad Bhagavatam until one is surrendered to his spiritual master and anxious to hear. So one should submissively surrender to the spiritual master, and then that anxiety to hear automatically develops in that person. Then it says, actually, in the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, Sukadeva Goswami says in a very nice sloka, he says, O learned Brahmanas, when Sukadeva Goswami recited Bhagavatam there in the presence of Parikshit Maharaj, I heard him with rapt attention. And thus by his mercy, I learned Bhagavatam from that great and powerful sage. Now I shall try to make you hear the very same thing as I learned it from him and as I have realized it. So there's a very nice sloka in which it is mentioned how when Sukadeva Goswami was reciting Srimad Bhagavatam to Parikshit Maharaj, Sudha Goswami was there and he says, I heard him with rapt attention. That means one must hear with proper attention. And then by the mercy of the person who is speaking, he says, I learned Bhagavatam from that great and powerful sage. And now I shall try to make you hear the very same thing. That means Sudha Goswami is not adding anything. He is not subtracting anything from what he has heard. And he says that as I learned it from him and as I have realized it. That means it is not just learning Srimad Bhagavatam, but what happens is that when one applies the knowledge that one has heard, the knowledge he has heard, one gets realization. I'm sure that all of you have been hearing Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam all these months or years. At least some changes have happened and some realizations have taken place in everyone who is hearing. So when you speak after having some realizations, then it has got some effect. And then it is mentioned, there is mentioned that hearing a message from a sage like Sukadeva Goswami can never be tiring due to any reason. That means when a person like Sukadeva Goswami speaks, and then one who hears, like for example, Parikshit Maharaj, he heard for 7 days and 7 nights continuously without drinking a drop of water also. So that is the power when one gets when he hears from proper authority. The next important point that is mentioned in today's sloka is that one should not hear from a person who does not represent the original Acharya. That means we should not hear from those who are not connected to a bona fide Acharya. So as I mentioned before, even when it comes to material knowledge, one requires a teacher or a guru who is from a proper authority. And that is what is very important, particularly more important when it comes to transcendental knowledge. What I will do is, there is no time for the pastime, which I wanted to narrate because we already started late. I'll go and mention for the next 5 minutes some more important points that I had to. Yeah. Topics of the Lord should be heard from one who is materially uncontaminated, then it acts like an injection. That means if the speaker is materially contaminated, one should not hear from him. But when one is materially uncontaminated, then it acts like an injection. Supposing when somebody has fallen sick, we want immediate relief, and the doctor might say, okay, I will give you an injection, and then we get an immediate relief. So when we are suffering the threefold miseries of this life, when we are desperate, and what happens is that if the doctor is genuine, if the speaker is from an authoritative source, it acts like an injection. Srila Prabhupada also mentions in the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam that one should hear from a self-realized soul and not from a professional recitator or a mundane scholar. Now, There are many Bhagavad Sapta, so many classes, so many things going on in the society in the name of spiritual matters or spiritual realization. But many charge, like any professional reciters, they may say, I need this much of money for reciting Srimad Bhagavatam. Now, when one has got that material motivation or material intention, the hearer should not hear from such places or persons, and one should not also hear from a mundane scholar. Now, why the reason is given, professional researchers speak to please the audience, and one comes to hear for purifying by hearing from professionals, one sense of other pampered. That means professional speakers who recite Srimad Bhagavatam on a professional matter or on a scholarly basis, they speak to please the audience. And when one hears this, the senses are more agitated. Instead of the senses being purified, the senses become more agitated. And one should not hear from whose aim of life is to make money, or one who is associated with persons engaged in sex. One cannot learn from Bhagavatam for one who is giving interpretation based on mundane scholarship, and one should not hear from a Mayavadi. From this, we should understand, Sri Chaitanya, Srila Prabhupada mentioned the purport. One should not hear from a Mayavadi, because Mayavadis believe that God has no form, He has no name, He has nothing. God is formless. So when one hears from a Mayavadi, one does not understand or realize the transcendental form of the Lord or the transcendental activities of the Lord. That is why it is said that one should not hear from any Mayavadi. If hearing from a Mayavadi is like hearing, touching, like a milk touched by a serpent. Milk, when it is pure, it remains pure. But the moment it is touched by a serpent, that milk becomes poisonous. And anyone who drinks it, he can have a disaster in his life. Similarly, when one hears from a Mayavada, when one hears from a non-devotee, it is hearing transcendental knowledge from a serpent. This is an example that is given by Srila Prabhupada. So that is why, so one should not associate with impersonalists, because by associating, one cannot understand with Mayavadis, one cannot understand the personal form of the Lord. And one more important point before I conclude the class is mentioned that one cannot become a Brahmana by simply taking birth in a Brahmana family. But perfection can be achieved in life by hearing about the pastimes of the Lord from a bona fide source. So many times we see that those who are claimed to be born in a Brahmin family, they may say, I'm Brahmana by birth. But actually, qualification is not achieved just by birth, but qualification is achieved by hearing the pastimes of the Lord from a bona fide source. By that, one can become a Brahmana better than even a born Brahmana. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when he was here, he himself set a perfect example. He used to go to Gadadhara Pandit. Gadadhara Pandit was one of the associates of the Lord. He always recites Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. So Gadadhara Pandit was one of the associates of the Lord, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu used to go to this Tota Gopinath temple in Puri. Anybody who has gone to Puri might remember the Tota Gopinath temple. Gadadhara Pandit used to be there, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu used to hear the pastimes of Dhruva Maharaj and Prahlad Maharaj, not one time or two times, but hundreds of times. And he showed by example that for one to be consistently progressing, one must have a regular hearing of the glories of the Lord and his devotees. That means one should hear the pastimes of the Lord and his devotees again and again and again and again, because every time we hear, our realizations can change, and many realizations will can be had in one's spiritual life in the process of hearing and hearing again and again. But if we think, yes, I know Dhruva Maharaj pastimes, I know Prahlad Maharaj pastimes, but on the other hand, if I'm not having realization, then what is going wrong? So that is why it is stressed that we must hear again and again and again and again the same pastimes. There is nothing wrong in it, because our realizations will definitely change in the process of hearing continuously. So this is what I had for today's class. I can take some questions, comments, if anyone has got into the subject matter.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna, Mataji.
Thank you for the class.
Thank you.
Uh,
Yes, Mataji.
Thank you for making us realize the importance of hearing from the right source. Yes, as you said, how much ever, like every time we'll get new realization, and it's important that we hear from the right source and progress.
Yes, Mataji.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Anybody else? Any other questions, comments? Thank you all very much. Grantha Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki